Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sanctum Presents tonight, The God Molecule. Thank you all so much for coming out. Sanctum Psychedelia is a nonprofit research, educational, and harm reduction organization located in beautiful Portland, Oregon. Since forming in 2018, Sanctum has hosted a variety of speakers knowledgeable in the latest cutting-edge advances in psychedelic science, history, anthropology, and spirituality. We threw the Guy in Mind Psychedelic Conference in 2019, rebranded this year as the Sanctum Psychedelic Conference, and host the Sanctum Open Mic every Monday in this very room. To expand our mission, we are opening a nonprofit thrift store and psychedelic education center in the spring of 2023 that will allow us to raise funds for psychedelic-assisted therapy and continue to provide psychedelic integration, education, and support. If you want any information on that, visit sanctum.org. Quickly, our upcoming events are as follows. Tomorrow night, we have our Sanctum Open Mic, as we do every Monday, always at the Haven, now and forever. And this Tuesday, the 21st, we have our Sanctum Psychedelic Integration Circle. We've seen some weird shit, so have you. Let's talk about it. March 12th, we will have our next Sanctum Psychedelic Speaker Series featuring Jonathan Fredette, who will be giving a mushroom grow demonstration. Yes, ooh. Okay, that's an applause line. I got to remember that one. Okay. Our event after that will be April 16th. That will feature Ayana Shristi and myself in a collaborative discussion called The Secrets of Tarot and Microdosing Magic. I'm very psyched for this one. So, occult secrets mixed with microdosing and mushrooms. If you're down, that's in April. And this July 22nd and 23rd, our rebranded Sanctum Psychedelic Conference is going to be happening right in the theater area in this next room over here. I am so happy to announce that our keynote speaker will be Mr. Dennis McKenna. So Dennis is coming down to Portland. Really excited about that. Which brings us to our featured speaker of tonight. Merrill Ward has studied and practiced Western esoteric spiritual traditions and comparative world religions for over 30 years. Wow. Yeah. He is an ordained Gnostic priest, teacher, and the student of the religio-spiritual philosophies of Thelema and Hermeticism. Well, perfect. You're giving this talk tonight. That works out so well. With a special emphasis on entheogenic techniques and sacraments used for experiencing the divine. He has co-authored a comprehensive best practices and integration guide for working with entheogenic sacraments and regularly presents on entheogenic spirituality and related subjects at a variety of venues, including right here tonight. He is the founder and executive director of Awakening Divinities Ministries, has consulted with USONA Institute, and serves as an advisor on entheogenic research for the biopharmaceutical company Journey Collab. Merrill is also old school Sanctum. For those of you who are around in those, Ayana, Nick, you would have been around. The first Sanctum talk Merrill ever gave was at Pegasus Project. Yeah, so we got some old school family in the house tonight. This is something that doesn't always appear on his resume, but I think it's pertinent to tonight's discussion. Merrill has also been there for Eden and I in our hour of need. Over this last Thanksgiving weekend, Eden and I drove down to Northern California to pick up the last 33 boxes of the Timothy Leary archive. So these are the things that were in Timothy Leary's house when he transcended to the next incarnation. We now have all that stuff. Yeah, it's awesome. So we drove down to Catherine Lucas Damer and Bruce Damer's house in Northern California and spent the night in a barn. It was actually rather cozy. They made a nice bed for us, they had snacks out, and there was a little kitty cat named Smokey who snuggled with me all night long. So it was awesome. And just seeing Bruce's books on the shelves and his blueprints, and if anybody knows Bruce Damer, it was like just staying in the barn of a wizard. It was awesome. It was so cool. So we woke up on Thanksgiving Day. We had brunch with Catherine, Bruce, and a friend of theirs. And then finally, we got to look at the archive, which I'd been drooling over, you know, the whole ride and the entire morning, like, it's got no fucking archive. Anyway, our original plan was to drive back to Portland the next day on Friday because my band had a show. I believe it was actually here that Friday, and we're like, all right, so we'll leave early Friday morning, we'll gun it the 12 hours back to Portland, and then I'll play a show, I'll be fine. Well, Eden and I have been on the road before, and we know the stresses that comes with trying to leave a place on one day and get to another place 12 hours later on the same day. And so we said, well, if we could make it to Southern Oregon, it'd only be a 5-hour drive to Portland on Friday. And so, fortunately in my life, in my travels on the road of life, I met a magician who opened his door to Eden and myself so that we could rest our weary heads. That very talented magician is this man right here, Merrill Ward. He helped us unload all those boxes of Leary's junk and put them in his garage. Had a great conversation, as Merrill is wont to do, and then we went to sleep. As we left Ashland, I realized that wasn't the first time Merrill had been there for me. And I thought about it, and I realized ever since I moved to Portland 7 or 8 years ago, every time I've gone on tour, Merrill has opened his door to me every time, without question. I mention it tonight because I think, as you'll see in about an hour, this man is very good at opening doors. It is with great joy and pleasure that Sanctum presents for you our very dear friend and colleague, the ever-charming Merrill Ward.
Good evening, everyone. How y'all doing? Excellent. So I'm going to be playing with the angels tonight, meaning I'm going to be winging it. And so if you'd all bear with me on that, it would be deeply appreciated. This talk I have given before, just so everybody knows. I gave it in 2019 at the Portland Psychedelic Science Conference, Portland Psychedelic Society Conference, and I've done some slight variations on it, but at the end, we have a special surprise for everybody, which is we're going to do a Q&A of everything you've ever wanted to know about 5-MeO-DMT, the God molecule, and we're afraid to ask. So, as we go through this presentation, I want you to be thinking about that. I'm watching my time somewhat carefully. Give me just a second here. So I can see how long I'm going, because I have a tendency to go very long. So my name, as Tom mentioned, is Merrill Ward. Delighted and honored to be here. I want to take a moment to recognize Tom and Eden for all of the work, and my good friend Jen Beeman, who's back here, who do so much work in this organization here in the Portland area. Let's give it up for all of them. And I want to thank all of those of you who know me well and those who may not know me well yet, and hopefully we'll be able to fix that in due time. So my brief presentation today is entitled 5-MeO-DMT, Entheogens, and the Science of Spirituality. And we'll specifically focus on the subject of 5-MeO-DMT and how this amazing molecule intimately links both science and the phenomena of direct religious or spiritual experience in some very unique and rather exciting ways. And hopefully, if I don't digress too much, which I'm usually known to do, we'll actually have some time for that Q&A that I talked about at the end of the talk. So let's begin. So for millennia, what today we refer to as the disciplines and systems of science and religion, or natural philosophy and theology, as they were more commonly known by our ancestors, shared intimately intertwined roots that arose from the fertile soil of a common ground. It is a historical fact that some of the most important aspects of what we now refer to as the scientific method were originally pioneered by the ancient Egyptians, Mesopotamians, Greeks, Hindus, Jews, Taoists, Confucians, Buddhist, Hindu, Zoroastrian, Islamic, and Christian scholars, among others. In fact, it is the 13th century English philosopher, scholar, and alchemist, and Franciscan friar, Sir Roger Bacon, who is known as the father of the scientific method due to his empirical studies of nature. It has really only been a recent convention, within the last few hundred years, in fact, post-Cartesian, that academia has sought to actually distance these two disciplines from one another. And yet, there has always been a natural and essential link between these inherent aspects of our common humanity. And as Albert Einstein knew all too well, the most important and beautiful thing we can experience is indeed the mystery. Today, modern science, especially in the fields of the neurosciences, is once again discovering the essential links that exist between science and spirituality through research into the realms of psychedelics and entheogens, and how these particular crystalline keys can effectively open our bodies, hearts, and minds to deeper and more expanded levels of human consciousness, awareness, and healing. My presentation today will examine some of the critical links between these latest explorations into human consciousness using the scientific method, and gain a deeper understanding of our innate spiritual nature, its intimate connection to what I refer to as source consciousness itself, and how direct spiritual experience can enhance our lives in a variety of ways. So, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with this extraordinary and intriguing molecule, let me elucidate by providing you with a little bit of background and overview, if my slides will work. 5-MeO-DMT is a psychedelic of the tryptamine class, found in a wide variety of plant species. There we go. Throughout the world, and perhaps most notably in one species of amphibian, the Sonoran Desert or Colorado River toad, also known as the bufo or Ancilius alvarius. And perhaps even more intriguing is that this amazing molecule exists in you and I right now. In fact, it exists in all mammals, including human beings, along with its better-known cousin, N,N-dimethyltryptamine, or simply DMT, one of the essential ingredients found in the Amazonian ayahuasca brews. 5-MeO-DMT has traditionally been used by various indigenous peoples throughout both Central and South America, primarily as a psychoactive snuff, as can be seen right here with these two fine gentlemen enjoying it between themselves. More commonly known as yopo. Like other tryptamines, 5-MeO-DMT is an indole alkaloid molecule and has the same basic indole ring structure as DMT. So essentially, here are some key indole alkaloids. We're probably familiar with a lot of them. The basic structure is a 5-sided ring connected to a 6-sided ring. And for anybody, occultists who might be in the crowd, this is the formula for the great work accomplished. The combining of the 5, or the microcosm, human condition, with the hexagram, the macrocosm. So this idea of the combining the 5 and the 6 that can be seen in the basic structure of these indole alkaloid molecules, very important. Now here are some very common ones. So here's L-tryptophan, which is a common amino acid. And when it goes into the body, our body converts it first into tryptamine, and then into this important molecule right here, which is serotonin, by adding a simple methoxy structure to the 5-point of the 6 ring. So this is an oxygen and carbon atom right here. And it's also responsible for creating melatonin, which has that same really interesting structure right here. Then if we move on to the next slide, we can see other important indole alkaloids. So I really call these crystalline keys, and these crystalline keys fit into the locks of our neurocytes and unleash various states of consciousness. So over here we have psilocybin, which is now being used legally within the state of Oregon for healing and other usages. And psilocybin is essentially DMT with the addition of this phosphorus cross at the 4 point of the 6 ring. Now, once psilocybin goes into the body, it releases that phosphorus cross and becomes psilocin, which is the primary psychoactive ingredient within psilocybin. Down here is dimethyltryptamine, and then over here, again, 5-methoxy-dimethyltryptamine, which, if you look at it, is simply tryptamine, or DMT, with the addition of this methoxy group at the 5 point of the 6 ring. Fascinating, isn't it? Are you enthralled yet? It's going deeper. So let's see, where the hell did I leave off? Okay, like other tryptamines, 5-MeO-DMT, as I mentioned, is an indole alkaloid molecule, along with other important neurotransmitters, including serotonin and melatonin, with the addition of that methoxy group at the R5 position that I mentioned before. It was first synthesized in 1936, and then in 1959, it was isolated as one of the key psychoactive ingredients of Yopo snuffs. Within the body, 5-MeO-DMT acts primarily on the serotonin, on the serotonin 5-HT system with a particular binding affinity for the 5-HT1A receptor subtype and trace amine receptors, and has been shown to have significant long-acting MAOI effects, or monoamine oxidase inhibitory effects. So it essentially serves as a long-acting SSRI, effectively, meaning it keeps actively holding on to the serotonin receptor sites for longer than it normally would. So it acts as a natural antidepressant, as we're going to see in some of the Johns Hopkins details soon. 5-MeO-DMT is generally smoked, vaporized, or insufflated. Its onset effects when vaporized are essentially instantaneous, within mere seconds of ingestion, peaking from the 1 to 15 minute mark and lasting for upwards of 45 minutes, depending on the individual. A low threshold dose can be from 1 to 2 milligrams, while a moderate to strong dose, or a full release dose, as I like to call it, of synthetic material can be anywhere from 5 to 15 milligrams, inducing fully immersive transcendent states of consciousness, or unitive consciousness, as depicted in this beautiful painting by our good friend Alex Gray. While officially placed on the DEA's Schedule 1 in January of 2011, within the last several years, 5-MeO-DMT has begun being used clinically both outside and now inside the United States, showing some success in alleviating depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. It has also been successfully used as an adjunct to ibogaine addiction therapy to assist recovering patients with integration, and is currently being looked at for potential future clinical trials here in the US by the USONA Institute, which Tom mentioned before. In fact, Beckley Psytech in London has raised close to $200 million to begin studying 5-MeO-DMT for its therapeutic effects. Now, while officially placed on the DEA's Schedule 1 in January of 2011, within the last several years, I'm sorry, I skipped. Here we go. Even more recent research studies at the Dior Institute in Brazil have shown a clear pattern of results suggesting that 5-MeO-DMT may play a neuroprotective role in the human brain, as well as having significant anti-inflammatory and antidepressive capabilities while increasing levels of neuroplasticity. In fact, it creates synaptogenesis. So what 5-MeO-DMT is doing, unlike any other substances we found, is it creates more synaptic connections within the neural receptor sites. It is literally growing more dendrites and therefore is connecting and producing greater neuroplasticity, what has been called synaptogenesis. And that hasn't been seen on any other substances. Also, some additional important studies regarding patterns of use, motives of consumption, and acute subjective effects, as well as decreases in depression and anxiety, among others, have also been released in the past couple of years in partnership with Johns Hopkins University. And we'll specifically been looking at some of those studies a bit more closely as we move into the talk. 5-MeO-DMT has been researched by several notable luminaries within the psychedelic field, including Andrew Weil, Wade Davis, Jonathan Ott, as well as the late Ralph Metzner in his book, The Toad and the Jaguar, and Stanislav Grof, who in his introduction to that particular work further suggests that study and research of 5-MeO-DMT might prove promising in the treatment of post-traumatic stress, especially within war veterans. Within his seminal work, Tikal, or Tryptamines I've Known and Loved, renowned organic chemist and psychopharmacologist, the late Sasha Shulgin, listed 5-MeO-DMT as one of the only substances to induce what he described as a +4 experience. I'm gonna break off and tell a little story. So I met Sasha for the first time at the MAPS conference, the first MAPS conference in 2010. And he was kind of left in the commons area and he was just sitting there, and I kind of walked up to him and I kneeled down before him and I said, Dr. Shulgin, you know, I'm such a big fan of your work. I'm so deeply appreciative of everything that you've done. I noticed that you give 5-MeO-DMT this +4 rating. Were there any other psychedelics or entheogens that you came across that actually did that? And he looked down at me endearingly and he said, yes, there was one other. And I said, really? Well, can you tell me what it is? And this look came over the man's face that was so endearing. And he looked down at me and he said, oh my boy, I can't remember all of that. And so there apparently is one other +4 substance out there, but we still haven't been able to find it. So if anybody knows what it is in the audience, there will be a door prize if you can name it and prove it. But what we want to describe is, how many people here are familiar with Shulgin's rating scale? So not that many. So let's look over it for a second. So basically what Sasha wrote is that when you're taking a different psychedelic, it can impact you in different ways. So he said the +1, wait a second, let's go back. Look at this picture by Alex Gray of Sasha and Ann Shulgin, who just departed us last summer. She was such a dear woman, really, really kind. Both of these people were very, very kind and generous people. They had me over to their home on a number of occasions, and I'm so deeply grateful that I had a chance to meet them and get to know them in their lives, because they were just incredibly, incredibly beautiful and important people in this movement. So how the rating scale works is the level of effectiveness of a drug is on the plus or minus says the level of effectiveness of a drug that indicates a threshold action. If a higher doses produces a greater response, then the plus or minus was valid. If a higher doses produces nothing, then it was a false positive. So the +1, the drug is quite certainly active. The chronology, meaning the time frame, can be determined with some accuracy, but the nature of the drug's effects are not yet apparent. So this is kind of a threshold dose, right? The +2, both the chronology and the nature of the action of the drug are unmistakably apparent, but you still have some choice as to whether you will accept the adventure or rather just continue with your ordinary day's plans, if you are an experienced researcher, that is. The effects can be allowed to a predominant role, or they may be repressed or backgrounded and made secondary to other chosen activities. Everybody familiar with that? I'm sure you are. +3, not only are the chronology and the nature of the drug's actions quite clear, but ignoring its actions just no longer an option. The subject is totally engaged in the experience, for better or worse. But the plus 4 is something really, really special. The plus 4 is a rare and precious transcendent state which has been called a peak experience, a religious experience, divine transformation, a state of samadhi, which is the Hindu term which means union with God consciousness, and many other names in other cultures. It is not connected to the plus 1, 2, and 3 of the measuring of a drug's intensity. It is a state of bliss, a participation mystique, a connectedness with both the interior and exterior universes, which has come about after the ingestion of a psychedelic drug, but which is not necessarily repeatable with the subsequent ingestion of that same drug. Shulgin goes on to say, if a drug or technique or process were ever to be discovered which would consistently produce a plus 4 experience in all human beings, it is conceivable that it would signal the ultimate evolution and perhaps the end of the human experiment. I will hold that 5-MeO-DMT, and we will discover later, consistently produces that effect, if not in every human, in most humans, very reliably, which means that it's something very, very special. All right, let's see where we left off. Now, if I could just find my place back in here. Now, while some individuals, especially when utilized in an unsupervised or careless manner, have described 5-MeO-DMT's effects as utterly terrifying, that was specifically the case with Michael Pollan, as well as others, revealing the darkest depths of the collective human psyche. And yet, paradoxically, some have described these diverse effects as occurring simultaneously. Absolute terror, total bliss, all at the same time. 5-MeO-DMT has also become increasingly popular within the underground psychedelic movement, especially for those seeking a singularly unique psychedelic experience. This has especially been the case through the writings of authors such as my good friend, the late James Orrock, who unfortunately died in 2020 in a tragic paragliding accident. And the seminal, in his specific seminal work, Tryptamine Palace, 5-MeO-DMT and the Sonoran Desert Toad, A Journey from Burning Man to the Akashic Field. If anybody wants the recommendation for the best book on the subject, it would likely be that one. Followed up very, very shortly, in addition by various books, my good friend and colleague, Dr. Martin Ball, including The Entheogenic Evolution, his first one, Entheogenic Liberation, one of his more recent books. He just released an anthology of 5-MeO-DMT practitioners writing on how each of them approach this very, very specific work. Along with other published works by psychedelic luminaries such as Stan Groff, the late Ralph Metzner, who I mentioned previously, and with Michael Pollan's recent publication of his New York Times best-selling book, How to Change Your Mind, What the New Science of Psychedelics Teaches Us About Consciousness, Dying, Addiction, Depression, and Transcendence, where Pollan chronicles his own experience with 5-MeO-DMT, the popularity of so-called toad medicine ceremonies is expanding exponentially and beginning to capture prominent media attention as it becomes more well-known to the general public. And that's especially true when people like Mike Tyson have done it and said, I just promised I won't bite anyone's ear off ever again. Don't know that he's necessarily the best spokesman. But then you also have people like Tony Robbins who are coming out very, very publicly talking about their experiences with 5-MeO-DMT. As 5-MeO-DMT has been demonstrated to activate and release what Raja Yogins referred to as the Kundalini Shakti and can consistently induce dynamic states of what the Yogins referred to as Nirvikalpa Samadhi, or union with divine consciousness beyond any description whatsoever. Thus leading it to be related to the crown, to be called and referred to as the crown jewel of entheogens and the God molecule, which is the name my good friend Martin Ball has put on it. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you 5-MeO-DMT. That's the applause line. So my personal background is steeped in the study, as Tom mentioned, of comparative religions and a wide variety of various spiritual disciplines, including Raja Yoga, my longtime meditative practice, Hermetic Kabbalah, the study of the ancient mysteries of both the East and West, various tantric practices, both neo-tantra and traditional tantra, as well as ceremonial magic and transpersonal alchemy. Ceremonial magic being defined as the art and science of causing transformation to occur in conformity with will. Transpersonal alchemy, including esoteric physiology and psychology, and various techniques of theurgy, defined as working with God, or what I like to call source energy. And thaumaturgy, defined as the practical application of God energy towards apparently miraculous means. And for nearly the past 30 years, my primary focus has been on attaining to what I refer to as the mystical unitive experience, which has been described in many ways throughout many cultures, whether we want to call it samadhi, satori, moksha, rigpa, dharmakaya, bodhi mind, Christ consciousness, you name it. It is God consciousness, or however you may wish to describe it. And the one thing that I've learned over the last decade and a half is that every religion that I have researched has either an exoteric or esoteric entheogenic practice associated with it, and usually some form of entheogenic sacrament involved. And there are numerous entheogenic practices that I've personally undertaken before being introduced to this particular entheogenic sacrament. And I call it an entheogenic sacrament because that's really what it is. It's a Eucharist in its truest terms. So this term Eucharist comes from the ancient Greek, Eucharistos, which literally means a blessing. And most people are familiar with the Eucharist of the Roman Catholic Church, right? And so in that particular ceremony, the priest takes inert substances, the host and the wine, does their particular form of ceremonial magic called transubstantiation, and according to Catholic doctrine, literally converts or transmutes those inert substances into the body and blood of Jesus Christ, which the parishioners then consume, technically making Catholics cannibals by definition. And yet, that is precisely what Eucharistic sacraments are about. Taking something, making it God, consuming it, and thus becoming God. Well, with the greatest respect to our Roman Catholic brethren, I will hold that that is an inert sacrament. 5-MeO-DMT is the most sacrament you will ever encounter, or at least so far, the most sacrament I have encountered. So, for example, it's not only entheogenic sacraments and medicines, there are other entheogenic practices, including, for example, Raja Yoga from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali of the 3rd century of the Common Era, brought into popularity in the late 19th century in the West by Swami Vivekananda, and then popularized in Europe by British mystic and occultist Aleister Crowley. The pinnacle of Raja Yoga is the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi and the ability to master self-induction of the somatic states of consciousness. Practices such as Shivite Tantra and Kundalini Yoga are said also to be able to bring their ardent practitioners into these states of somatic union or divine consciousness. Taoist practitioner Mantak Chia, right over here, speaks about how light deprivation practices are able to potentially bring about deeper altered states of consciousness by first releasing higher amounts of melatonin within the brain and then subsequently releasing DMT and 5-MeO-DMT endogenously in the body. That has not been scientifically proven. Various practices of bodily mortifications. I love this guy here. Talk about burying your head in the sand. Practices of bodily mortifications practiced by numerous mendicants or spiritual ascetics such as the fakirs of India, the whirling dances of the darwesh of Persia can also be utilized to induce these deeper spiritual states of consciousness. So ultimately, I have worked through many of these various practices, and I really consider myself what has been called a scientific illuminist, which follows the methods of science and the aim of religion. Now, this term was adopted by British mystic and occultist Aleister Crowley, whose religious and spiritual philosophy, called thelema, which is the Greek word for will, inspired my initial spiritual calling back in the 1980s and started me on my particular spiritual path, which calls on each individual to essentially discover their true will, mission, and purpose in life, their dharma, essentially, and then to follow this out with the intention of establishing a direct connection to their own spiritual source, and then to take full responsibility for doing so, a term known in the occult traditions as the great work, the alchemical magnum opus of self-discovery, fulfilling the hermetic dictum of know thyself. In his essay entitled, I almost missed. In the mid-1980s, when I was starting upon my spiritual path, I was inspired to learn of a luminary within the first wave of the psychedelic Renaissance who was also inspired by Crowley. I consider myself fortunate to have met Dr. Tim Leary on another occasion. And here's where I go off into my other anecdotal story. So I worked in a lot of club scenes prior to the entire rave movement. Basically, I worked a number of very, very notorious after-hours clubs in Hollywood, one of which was called the 01. It was this moving club. The cops were always looking for us, trying to find where we were. They would do raids, and we would kind of be escaping them. And at the 0, especially when it was on Hollywood Boulevard, Tim and his wife at the time, Barbara, used to come in fairly frequently. And we would usually we would start the night at midnight, and people would start slowly coming in. You had to be a member. You kind of had to know the secret signs and passwords to kind of get in. And the environment at the 01, you would never know who was going to show up. People like Jack Nicholson and Lauren Bacall, and football players like Lyle Alzado, and then people like Tim and Barbara would show up, and you'd have gutter punks and like a whole smattering of very, very interesting melange of people. Well, on certain occasions, when everybody was getting out at 6 a.m. and the sun was coming up, Tim would turn to us and go, "Hey, everybody, come up to my place in the Hollywood Hills and let's have breakfast." And so I called these accounts breakfast at Timothy's. And so when we would have breakfast at Timothy's, there was probably about 4 occasions that I went up there. Breakfast at Timothy's consisted of scrambled eggs, hash, not corned beef, and cocaine. And we would eat eggs and smoke hash and do cocaine till the wee hours of the afternoon, and then everybody would stumble down the Hollywood Hills and go home. So the first time that I was up at Tim's, I was sitting in his kind of dining area, and he had bookshelves kind of lining the whole room. And I looked up, and there was a complete volume set of Aleister Crowley's Equinox. Crowley's Equinox is an encyclopedia of the occult. And I looked up and I looked at Tim and I said, "Wow, Tim, I didn't know you were into Aleister Crowley." And his complete complexion changed, and he looks at me and he said, "Merrill, do you know any of my work?" And sheepishly and very embarrassed, I said, "Not really. I know you were like, the high priest of LSD." And he's all, "Yeah, you really need to read my work, because Crowley was the biggest influence on my work of anybody." And so telling that story, I originally put a piece together back in 2013 that I gave, and I went, "Oh my God, I wonder if there's a way that I can actually prove that Leary said this to me." So I scoured the fledgling internet at the time, and I found this piece, which I'm gonna have to mic myself, but it's really worth it, and hopefully it's gonna work. See if it does it. Clumsy.
Well, I've been an admirer of Aleister Crowley. I think that I'm carrying on much of the work that he started over 100 years ago, and I think the 60s themselves. Crowley said he was in favor of finding your own self and do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law under love. It was a very powerful statement. I'm sorry he isn't around now to appreciate the glories that he started.
Kind of cool, right? So I thought it was rather cool, being an occultist myself and a student of comparative world religions and a practitioner of Thelema, that Timothy Leary was so influenced by Crowley's work, which has also been a massive influence on my own studies and researches. So let's move on, shall we? In his essay entitled Biblical Entheogens, a Speculative Hypothesis, psychology professor Benny Shannon argues for the idea that Moses himself may have encountered, when he encountered the burning bush in the desert, that it was actually a bush of desert acacia, which actually contains some of the highest levels of 5-MeO-DMT of any plant species on the planet. And he goes on to argue this because the word that is used in the Old Testament is shittim wood. And this shittim wood made everything up in the tabernacle in the wilderness model. So right here we have the Ark of the Covenant made out of shittim wood and laid over with gold. The altar of incense, wonder what kind of incense they were burning there, was made out of shittim wood. Over here we have the table of shewbread. The only thing in the tabernacle not made of shittim wood was the 7-branch candlestick, which was made entirely of gold. And so again, we can see the Ark of the Covenant, which contained the 3 principal objects of worship in the Hebraic tradition, the tablets of the sacred law, the pot of manna from heaven, Aaron's flowering rod. This is the altar of incense. Over here, I love this, especially this depiction. It was a thing called the table of shewbread, right? And so this term shewbread, like a shoe stone, was bread that you eat and it shows you something. The reason I like this particular image is because there's like bagels. That's totally hysterical. It's the bagels of shewbread. I wonder what kind of bread that was. So the idea that Shannon was putting forward is this idea that when Moses encountered the burning bush, it was literally a burning bush of desert acacia. And the fumes that were arising up from it intoxicated him, and he had the full 5-MeO-DMT experience, which then led him to be inspired to actually create the tablets of the sacred law, which he then brought down to the people. Now, whether or not that's true is incredibly speculative, but it's some interesting speculation. And Shannon, who is kind of the lead professor at Jerusalem University in cognitive neuroscience, it was pretty ballsy of him to put out a statement like that. So we don't really have much information on 5-MeO-DMT in the modern vernacular, or its modern use, before the 1983 publication of this small pamphlet entitled The Psychedelic Toad of the Sonoran Desert by this gentleman over here, Albert Most. Clearly a pseudonym. You guys get it? Al Most? Almost, but not quite. And actually, recently in one of his episodes of Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, Hamilton Morris revealed that this was actually a real person by the name of, do you remember? Anybody? I know it's Johnson, and I always get it wrong, but this was a guy who actually went out in the field and discovered that the Bufo alvarius toad, and you can see all of these beautiful depicted drawings, contained 5-MeO-DMT in its parotid glands, which could be then squeezed or milked and then smoked or vaporized to induce these various psychedelic effects. I highly recommend looking at Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia episode on this particular phenomena. Now, probably most interesting and intriguing is, again, as I mentioned, is that both 5-MeO-DMT and NN-DMT exist inside you and I in trace amounts. And More recently, within the last couple of years, they did the research back in 2017, and then in 2019, Johns Hopkins University, along with Source Research Foundation, which is my good friend Alan Cooey Davis's organization, began to publish a number of research studies on 5-MeO-DMT through Johns Hopkins. How am I doing time-wise, Tom? Yeah, it's about 30. Okay, well, let's see if what we can do here. So this study in particular, which I thought was very, very important, called The Influence of Set and Setting on the Acute Subject Effects of 5-MeO-DMT, and produced by a number of really notable researchers, including my good friend Joseph Brasuglia, Raphael Lancelota, Roland Griffiths of the Johns Hopkins team, and here's Alan Cooey Davis. So basically, to go through what this study engaged in, and I'm going to skip the top one, is stating that 5-MeO-DMT had been used in various contexts, including recreational, and research has shown that the set and setting of a psychedelic experience are critical factors associated with acute effects. Anecdotal evidence suggests the same may be true for 5-MeO-DMT. However, we could find no empirical support for this. And yet, it was Timothy Leary, along with Ram Dass and Ralph Metzner, who came up with the entire concept of set and setting. And I will hold that the entire concept of set and setting was based on Leary's ideas from Crowley around ceremonial magical technique, and that the use of ceremonial magical technique, including things like induction, guided meditations that bring you into a deeper state of relaxation, techniques of banishing and purification and consecration to really set a firm and clear container, could be used to deepen a person's experience within the psychedelic or entheogenic settings. That makes sense to everybody? Great. So then, if we come down to the bottom, therefore we sought to examine the influence of set and setting on the acute and persisting effects of 5-MeO-DMT. So what they did is, the aim of the current study is to examine the influence of set and setting and the subjective effects of synthetic 5-MeO-DMT by comparing individuals that have used 5-MeO-DMT, one, in the general population, and two, in a particular structured group setting in the Western United States. So that setting was a particular group that used ceremonial techniques to create this safe, sacred, and secure container within which people could then experience 5-MeO-DMT. So they used the internet to basically create two sample groups that included members of this specific underground group that I talked about, who used 5-MeO-DMT in what they called a structured setting. It was a ceremonial setting. The group guides the dose and administration of 5-MeO-DMT and the preparation of and support during and following sessions, meaning they did a good deal of preparation, so people were feeling really prepared. They gave a good framework for doing the medicine, and then they also provided integration support afterwards. And procedures used in laboratory studies with psychedelics, measures included frequency of use, mystical experiences, challenging experiences, persisting effects, and set and setting variables. So basically, they had these two groups: the general population, which was 284 people, and then the structured or ceremonial group, which was larger at 362. The mean age, and they basically went out to, for the general population group, they went out to various websites and internet groups that focus on 5-MeO-DMT and solicited this information from them. With the structured group, they got in touch with their organizers. Their organizers said they would be willing to work with that, and then had members of their community participate directly in the studies. So the mean age of the general population was 34, rather young. Mean age here, 48, skewed much higher. 88% in the unstructured group was male, only 55%, so a much larger female population in the structured group. White and Caucasian at 84%, 88%, and 84% here, so it was a little more colorful in terms of this group. Heterosexuals, 80%, 79%, so this group was a little more gay. The proportion sample who had a complete mystical experience is what's really important. 50% of the general population said that they had achieved the complete mystical unit of experience. And this was based on psychometrically verifiable studies that they had done. We're going to talk about those in a minute. But the important thing is the structured group had an 83.4% success rate. That's almost 84% of bringing people into the complete mystical unitive state of consciousness. This has not been shown in any other research anywhere to have a rating that high. And we're going to do some comparisons here. So the amazing findings are the significant statistics documented in this report. First, the survey included 284 respondents in the general population, 362 in the structured group, in a regular ritualized ceremonial setting. This segment had quite a higher number of female respondents, as I mentioned, over double than in the general population group, and the median age skewed 14 years higher among the members of the structured group. The real significant findings are in the results pertaining to the responses given concerning what the study refers to as the complete mystical experience that was determined by the revised mystical experience questionnaire that was developed by the Johns Hopkins team, especially Frederick Barrett, who really made sure that that work was psychometrically verifiable. And originally adapted from the questions created by Walter Pankey, although I have Walter Pancake here for some reason, there's a nice misspelling, from the March Chapel experiment using criteria based on a number of verifiable, anecdotal, and scientific factors. The general population group showed a fairly significant number, as I mentioned, at 50%, had experienced what they define as the complete mystical experience. However, the structure group, again, showed that 83.4%, over 33% higher, which clearly demonstrates that the general format that this particular group is utilizing in terms of pre-framing, preparing individuals for the experience, and how they're co-creating what is referred to as a sacred container for their ceremony. The methods they're utilizing in administering the sacrament and holding space for individuals within the experience itself, as well as the materials, techniques, and support offered for integration and follow-up, seems to be having a significant demonstrative impact in the positive results of the experience by their members over the unregulated general population group. So in drilling down into the details, this includes significantly higher overall positive effects of the acute mystical experience, significantly lower challenging effects, significantly longer positive persisting effects, and a lower frequency of use within the structured group. And it gets even more interesting. Oops, I skipped. The mean rating of intensity. So in terms of a mystical experience, the three asterisks, just so you know, in red, mean that they are statistically and significantly higher. In mysticism, the ranking was higher. Positive mood, higher. Transcendence of space and time, higher. Ineffability, the inability to explain it, all higher in the structured group. This was the mean rating of intensity of acute challenging experiences. So in terms of isolation, in the general population was much higher. Fear, much higher. Interestingly enough, in terms of grief, the structure group was higher, meaning that the individuals in that group had the ability to experience more grief and to stay with that grief. Physical distress, general population significantly higher. Insanity, death, and paranoia, all significantly higher. So in his truly outstanding presentation titled The Variations of the 5-MeO-DMT Experience and Considerations for the Future, was presented at the first World Bufo Alvarez Congress event in 2018 in Mexico City. Our good friend and scientific researcher who participated in these studies, and theogenic enthusiast Dr. Joseph Basurglia, offered a detailed comparison of varied group samples reporting on the complete mystical experience, which not only included the two groups from the study that we were just looking at, but also included statistics reported from previous 5-MeO studies within the general population, as well as the well-known Johns Hopkins psilocybin research. Dr. Barsuglia's own research, also from a survey of Bufo recipients from the Crossroads Recovery Clinic in Mexico. This next graphic chart clearly indicates that the results from the structured temple group rank significantly higher than any research previously conducted, and with a sample group that is significantly larger than any others within this comparison. And so there is the chart. So basically, within the synthetic 5-MeO, in the unregulated group, we saw about 50%. In the moderate to high psilocybin groups that Roland Griffith's team at Johns Hopkins did, 53%. That's the moderate. The high dose psilocybin, they got up to 67%. Notice these are only with 18 participants. In the Toad 5-MeO epidemiology reports that Joseph Berserglia did, it got up to 74%. His research in Crossroads, which was only 20 people, up to 75. Again, in the 5-MeO spiritual group, 83%, significantly higher, off the charts. Another really important study more recently done by members of the Johns Hopkins team, various other researchers. Again, we can see Barsuglia, Griffiths, Davis, and Lancelota on this as well. The cognitive effects of 5-MeO DMT are associated with improvements in depression and anxiety. This is a really important one in regards to healing. So again, they use the same study groups to look at this. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. The primary aim of the current analysis is to examine whether the use of 5-MeO is associated with spontaneous and unintended improvements in depression and anxiety among people who have used 5-MeO DMT in the United States, with procedures that guide the source, dose, and administration of 5-MeO DMT, and the preparation and support during and following the sessions. The second aim of the study is to examine factors associated with improvements in depression and anxiety. So again, this is just going over how they got the samples in. And again, we see that 362 number, which was the sample of the moderated group, and again, 173. So basically what they found is within the 362, 173 people said that they either had depression or anxiety. And within that, the rates of depression were for 149 people, improved 79%, and then stayed the same or worsened was 21%. And if you actually look at the data, which I'm going to go look at here, of those reporting having been diagnosed with depression, 41% of the total group, or anxiety, 48%, most reported symptoms were drastically improved. 81% of depression, 79% of anxiety, usually after one single use of 5-MeO DMT. And fewer reported their symptoms were unchanged, 17%, or worsened, which was 2 or 3%. Got it. Indications showed that improvements in depression and anxiety were directly associated, this is really important, with the greater intensity of mystical experiences and higher ratings of positive beliefs about the spiritual, significant, and personal meaning of their 5-MeO DMT experience. Meaning, when they had the ability to link the meaning of their 5-MeO DMT experience to their own spirituality, that is what was causing the improvement in effect. Now, the last thing I want to look at is an interesting phenomenon that occurs with people who use 5-MeO DMT that has been coined reactivations. So a lot of people associated this with LSD flashbacks. I have found that it is incredibly different. Again, we've got Alan Davis, Rafael Lancelota, and Annie Ortiz, who is indigenous Sonoran Desert clinician and woman who's been working with the Bufo alvarius. I use the term bufotoxin because that's what it is. Many people call it toad venom. It's not venom. Venom's injected by either fangs or stingers. So it's actually bufo secretion is what it is. And so what Annie pretty much discovered is that people using 5-MeO DMT, which has shown clinical potential due to its short duration and ability to induce mystical experiences. However, this phenomenon known as reactivation, similar to flashbacks, is a poorly understood, frequently reported phenomenon which appears associated with 5-MeO DMT use and has further warranted investigation, which is what she did. So this study examined whether differences in age, gender, education, lifetime use location, preparation strategies predict reactivations as primary outcomes. And And the study used secondary quantitative data, again, from the same two groups that we had talked about. And yet they were slightly skewed. So in here, again, she's just explaining the term reactivation to be similar with the term flashbacks. I really dislike the term flashbacks. I don't think it's really talking about what this experience really is, whereas reactivation is really talking about the fact that people will go back into this full experience of unitive consciousness, sometimes well after their original experience and not having done anything. It can be brought on by other substances, cannabis, other psychoactives, but it is definitively a real phenomenon. And so the DMS-5 includes a similar phenomenon, so if we look at it pathologically, called hallucinogen persisting perpetual disorder, which distinguishes two types. Type 1 is essentially benign intermittent re-experiences. Type 2, radically different condition in which the re-experiencing of some aspects of the altered state generates significant distress in the individual. So again, this is just describing the recruitment, about the structured group, the unstructured group. I'm kind of flying through this. So the present study includes 344, slightly reduced from the other population setting. But the important one is this. This in turn, however, could prime, meaning that, let me start from the top. Given that the data presented here indicates that females have a significantly higher likelihood of reporting reactivations, perhaps certain precautions can be taken to reduce the potential for any adverse effects resulting from unanticipated reactivation. And then what they're describing here is the idea that the structured group actually explains that reactivations is a thing before people participate, because you need to do that because somebody cannot give consent to do the experience if they don't know reactivations is a thing, right? Everybody gets that? Yeah, so, but they state in turn, however, could prime participants to be more likely to experience reactivations, given the role of expectancy bias has been noted to have an association with flashback phenomena. I don't believe that's true. I actually think that people have to be informed of this phenomena before they undergo this medicine, or it's ethically, it's an ethical violation not to let people know that. At any rate, I could go a lot more deeply, but Tom gave me the 5-minute mark. So I just wanted to talk about the idea before we conclude. The conclusions of our findings show that the occurrence of reactivation phenomena resulting from synthetic 5-MeO-DMT use is not uncommon. They actually showed that about 73% in the structured group were experiencing this reactivation phenomenon. But of that 73%, 96% said it was an important part of the experience, or it added a lot to their experience. And only about 13% said that it was challenging in its ongoing state. So I'm gonna wrap up the scientific part and see if we can move on. We have time for Q&A?
Yes, we do.
Do I get the fancy chair?
No, I like it.
You do?
No, I'm kidding. Yeah,
you can have the fancy chair if you like it.
We're going to go into the Q&A portion. Just going to set up the stage real quick. Be 1 sec.
Oh, this is going to be a big setup, I can tell.
Very big setup.
You got a burrito?
No, it's
It's a not. Okay. Here, put me over the side so I don't have the light right in my face. Sure. So this brings us to our next segment, which is called 5-MeO-DMT, everything you wanted to know but were afraid to ask.
Do we have any questions from the crowd right here?
I was noticing that this guy totally looks like Timothy Leary. You remind me of Timothy Leary.
It's the hair.
I don't know if it's just the hair, it's his demeanor. What's your name, brother?
My name is Scott.
Hey, Scott, what's your question?
So what did they attribute that, the difference between the Johns Hopkins study being 84-ish percent and
Right.
the others being
50%.
Well, the other, 5-MeO-DMT experiments were in the 70s, 74%, 70. When you had that
Right.
chart, what did they attribute that to? I'm assuming those all had set and setting regulations as well, or
Quite possibly. Again, I don't know what the other studies based on what each of them were. But the thing is that whatever this group was doing within their ceremonial context was having an impact. So whether it was the dosing protocols that they were using, how they were administering the medicine, which I understand they were using a very, very specific administration device that's called the lamp of invisible light. It's now a chemical unit that actually uses argon gas to administer very, very precise dosages of the medicine. So, so what I believe, when I really look at it, is there's a particular gestalt of what that group is doing that is somehow influencing set and setting. You could call it pre-framing, that allows for this greater level of mystical unit of experience to occur. And I believe, from what I understand of this group, that they are using ceremonial magical frameworks, liturgical theoretical frameworks that allows for this deeper level of opening to the experience. I mean, you can really refer to it as people feeling safe, solid, sacred, and secure. And because when you move into that phenomenon, that level of safety allows people to surrender more fully into the experience. And again, that's speculative, but I think that's what's really happening.
Can confirm. We have a question from one of our online viewers.
Oh, an online viewer. Hello, online viewers.
This is from Eva.
Eva.
Eva asks, does one's tolerance to DMT change with more use?
So I can't speak to that in regards to DMT, but I can speak to it in regards to 5-MeO-DMT. So so you could speculate that you could then take that to include DMT. So each person has their own particular tolerance level to any given substance. And with 5-MeO-DMT, it's a matter of finding what's called the EMD, or the effective minimal dose, for the person to go in and have the full mystical unit of experience. Many 5-MeO-DMT practitioners use a vernacular that talks about a handshake dose, which is kind of a sub-threshold dose, a hug dose, which is a moderate threshold dose, and then the full embrace dose. I believe that kind of languaging is inaccurate. So there has been some dosing protocols that have been put out that describe that people who know themselves to be incredibly sensitive to various medicines or have never done 5-MeO-DMT before should consider starting in the 3 to 5 milligram dose range. A moderate dose could be considered between 6 to, call it, 10 to 11 milligrams. A larger dose range could be anywhere from 12, 13 to 20 plus milligrams. So the thing we know about the metabolization of 5-MeO-DMT and DMT is, well, first, it crosses the blood-brain barrier immediately. DMT, when smoked or vaporized, does that, but it's not orally active. So you can eat spoonfuls of DMT and it's not going to do anything. So within ayahuasca brews, they mix the DMT with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which is the ayahuasca vine, which then allows the DMT to go through the stomach lining into the bloodstream and then crosses the blood-brain barrier. 5-MeO-DMT does not need an MAOI. In fact, it's dangerous to use MAOIs in conjunction with 5-MeO-DMT. So in regards to Eva's specific question, you have to find that effective minimal dose per person. What I am aware of is that certain people who have done 5-MeO-DMT and, let's say, start out with a kind of average high dose of 12 milligrams, I put it this way. I know of someone who is a 4 foot, 10 inch, 100-pound woman who did 4 15 milligrams back to back in a 20-minute period. That's 60 milligrams of 5-MeO-DMT, not recommended really for anyone, considered a large overdose. She had a complete mystical unit of experience. The same woman, I understand now, needs 2 to 3 milligrams to get her into the same state, meaning that 5-MeO-DMT has shown itself to be reverse tolerant, meaning the more that you do it, the less that you need, because it is actually myelinating the neural pathways in order to allow for somebody to go back into that state with greater levels of ease and facilitation.
Another question. I'll right after.
I'm stretching you guys, don't mind me.
Realizing the research has only been done for a few years, I was wondering if the researchers kept track of the subjects to see how long-lasting was their reported overcoming depression and anxiety.
So Johns Hopkins was looking at that in the anecdotal reporting that they were doing, but it was all basically, whatever responses that people were giving. And so they haven't looked at it over time, but what they found in the Hopkins research is that these were long-lasting effects, especially within the depression and anxiety study. They found that it was lasting over time. Now, does there need to be more research? Absolutely. But I would believe that some of these practitioners who are offering the medicine, they're not necessarily researchers per se. They're working within a spiritual context that's very focused on allowing somebody to have this mystical unitive experience. So they probably are leaving it up to the researchers to do that kind of reporting. Does that make sense? And did it answer your question? Good. Anybody else? I can't hear you though. Yep. Is it working?
Hello.
It's working now. Hi, Eden. It's still not working. It's cutting in and out.
Hello. Okay, I'm going to stick it and keep it right there. Okay. Jaw from the online audience asks, does Leary's book, The Psychedelic Experience, have Crowley's input more than the Tibetan Book of the Dead?
Well, so Ram Dass and Leary utilized the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which Crowley talks a lot about in his own research quite a bit. Where they got that idea, I don't know, and I would have to go back in and look at the Psychedelic Experience to see if there was mention of Crowley there. I do not know.
Next question, Ali.
So thank you so much for being here, first
of
all.
course.
And just a curiosity.
I think we need a new
Testing.
battery in that one.
Curiosity.
Yes.
Curiosity on your thoughts on methoxin, also known as 4-HO5-MeO-DMT.
Yeah, silomethoxin.
And your thoughts on its application in the same or similar therapeutic work that is possible with 5-MeO-DMT.
Sure. So silomethoxin is kind of the new shiny bouncing ball that's going on in the room and all over the internet with the launch of an organization called the Church of Silomethoxin. And so silomethoxin first appears in Timothy Leary's work in Tikal, where he synthesized silomethoxin, which is essentially psilocin with a methoxy group within the molecule. Sasha then had the idea that you could take psilocybin and spray the substrate with 5-MeO-DMT salt, and the mushrooms would catalyze themselves and produce a totally different molecule called silomethoxin. Well, the Church of Silomethoxin folks, who I know well, experimented with that and found that it was true, and it created this entirely different molecule. So you want my personal opinion? So my personal opinion, having done silomethoxin, is it doesn't compare at all. It has a very, very mild effect that might be used well for microdosing use, but I haven't used it enough, and there's zero research at all on it in terms of its effects. So the answer is, we have no idea. Personally, I haven't been that impressed with it. There are other people who've utilized it, say they really enjoy it. I've worked with it on several times and have had, the thing I like about it is it doesn't make me nauseous at all, which is kind of cool, but I haven't had any real stimulating effects. What I find interesting is that the people who started the organization are two very, very well-respected lawyers in the entheogenic and psychedelic community. And I have a strong feeling that they're really pushing the envelope with silomethoxin to see if they can essentially get a court case generated around it, which I personally feel is a bad idea right now when you consider how our Supreme Court is imbalanced. Did that answer your question? Awesome. We need another battery.
No, that's far.
Oh, just shout it out. Hold on, I'm going to get closer so I can hear you. Actually, you know what we're going to do? We're going to share microphones. That's so weird.
You referenced some of them, but are there any other additional safety protocols that you're aware of with using 5-MeO?
Safety protocols using 5-MeO. Well, anyone who is working with 5-MeO, I believe, has a responsibility to do a full health screening on somebody, because if people have, let's say, significant heart conditions or something like that, they may not be a good candidate for 5-MeO DMT. The other thing to know is that the bufotoxin or the bufo secretion is primarily contains what's known as 5-HO-DMT, also known as, my brain just went blank. That's interesting. Maybe I need some more 5-MeO-DMT. I don't know. Bufotenine. So every single toad on our planet produces bufotenine in its bufotoxin, essentially. It's its protective mechanism. But only the Sonoran Desert toad produces 5-MeO-DMT, and we can talk about that in a second. But in terms of screening protocols, people should be doing verbal, at least verbal, if not full intake health screenings to make sure they're in good physical and mental health before participating. That is number one criteria. And if there is any doubt in the physical or mental health of the individual, practitioner should decline serving, is my opinion. Other protocols, people, practitioners should be available to essentially offer integrative support to people who are going through their ceremonies, or at least be able to provide clinicians or integration specialists to help them with any issues they might run in. Because just as 5-MeO-DMT can expand you into the greatest heights and breadths of source consciousness or God consciousness, it also can plunge you down into the deepest, darkest depths of the shadow of human collective consciousness. And if you're not really ready to go there, that can bring up a lot of things that you may not want to face. And so people really need to have a clear orientation before stepping into the experience, so that all of that is covered, so that essentially they can do so with consent and a full fuck yes before participating. Did that answer your question? I mean, there are other protocols that people can do, meaning there are a lot of kind of renegade 5-MeO bufo practitioners who will just shove an unspecified dose into a pipe and light it for somebody. And that is the primary thing that produces problems. Or they may have practices that they think are wise that aren't, like pouring 2-liter bottles of water over somebody's face to induce a breathing response, for example, or doing ceremonies in an unsafe setting where somebody can get hurt based on the setting not being safe, solid, sacred, or secure. So there's a lot of things that really go into serving this medicine safely. Okay,
This gentleman.
that sounds good. I'm going to sit in the chair if I can.
Thanks, Merrill, for your talk.
Hi, Andrew.
Hey.
You're welcome.
My question is, this is really loud. So 5-MeO-DMT seems like can alleviate depression, anxiety,
Yes.
has all these amazing long-lasting effects.
Yes.
What is it like to do 5-MeO-DMT?
Oh. Well, not that I've ever done it myself. but if I did. So that's not true. I have done 5-MeO-DMT myself. So let me breathe into that for a second. Because we've been using our intellect a whole lot. It has nothing to do with the intellect whatsoever. So the 5-MeO-DMT experience is, I was about to say likely, not likely, is the most profound experience that a human being can likely have. Because the dissolution of the egoic structure of who you've believed yourself to be completely and utterly vanishes away, and you experience the infinite and eternal perfection that is the underlying heart of all of existence and creation. You not just experience it, I'd like to say you become it, but you don't become it. You just realize you are it and have always been it forever. And that this incarnation that you have dropped yourself into in this particular frame, which is completely and utterly temporary, dissolves away, and you realize the infinite and eternal perfection has always been there. And you say, oh, surprise. Or you say, oh, holy fuck, you gotta be kidding. You know, and then slowly things kind of come back together and you realize that you've been looking at things from a particular frame, and that frame now has grown substantially, if not infinitely. And it allows one to address their lives in a different way. And it doesn't mean that everything, you know, it's not a panacea, you know, it's not a cure-all for everything, but it can allow for this greater perspective to occur. Meaning, I still have all my shit that I gotta deal with, but now I just realize that I have to take complete radical responsibility for all of my own shit.
Sure. And a question from the online.
Did that answer it, Andrew? I mean, I don't even like talking about it because it's like, there's no way to really describe this. It's like Ralph Metzner in his last interview with Rak Razam, you know, Rak Razam said, so I noticed, Ralph, that you don't like talking about your experiences like you used to. And Ralph said, well, you know, the deal is that these experiences are the most intimate experiences that one can have. I would equate it with being even far more intimate than having sex with my wife. So when people ask me to describe my experiences on 5-MeO-DMT, it's like, you know, explaining an experience about having sex with my wife. And so that's why I generally don't do it. But thanks for asking.
We have a question from our online audience. This is from Colin. Have there been reports, history of physical deaths during a DMT experience?
Yes. So, and I'm going to go back with specifically 5-MeO-DMT because I don't know the answer to that in regards to NN-DMT. So, yes, there have been deaths associated with 5-MeO-DMT. However, there have not been any known deaths due to overdose in regards to 5-MeO-DMT at all, because there's technically nothing toxic about 5-MeO-DMT. Synthetic, lab-made, lab-grade synthetic molecule. Not true for the bufotoxin, because it's a toxin, right? It's actually the toad's defense mechanism. So within the bufotoxin, the bufosecretion, there are over 100 different alkaloids, beta-carbolines in it. The majority of which, as I mentioned before, is bufotenine. And you know, up to 85% of the substance is bufotenine, with somewhere between 15 and more recent studies have shown 35% being 5-MeO-DMT. My friend Joseph Braserglia talks about an entourage effect within the bufosecretion. I don't think people are really looking for an entourage effect when they're doing 5-MeO-DMT. They're looking for the 5-MeO-DMT because that's what's delivering the effect. So there's a lot of arguments between people saying, oh, the bufo's better because it's organic, and people saying, yeah, lab-made material, that's not good. And I can understand the reasoning behind that. The medical profession has not been, you know, really top-notch in that regard. But the fact of the matter is 5-MeO-DMT is non-toxic. So most of the deaths that have been associated with 5-MeO-DMT have been by people who have not been appropriately medically screened beforehand for physical and mental health. And there's one death I know of, for example, in Spain, where a gentleman did 5-MeO-DMT, photographer, was not screened, had a heart attack, and died, and they tried to cover it up. There's also known deaths from practitioners who are working irresponsibly with the medicine, doing things like blowing rape, tobacco rustica, up people's noses when they're in full induced 5-MeO-DMT state, which has resulted in inflammation of the lungs, and they have died because of that or other things. There's also people who've done 5-MeO-DMT on their own, which I do not recommend, who have then vomited and then aspirated on their own vomit and died in that way. So most of the deaths that I am aware of, that there's also people doing it in unsafe settings, like, I don't know, hot tubs. And they're by themselves, they do the medicine, they go underwater, and they drowned. That's not a death because of 5-MeO-DMT. That's a death because of poor usage of a medicine. So most of the deaths associated with 5-MeO-DMT have been poor usage, bad facilitation, no facilitation.
We have another one from our online audience, and we're getting close to the hour, so this might be our last one.
No way. Let's keep going.
Depending on how long-winded you get.
I can get very long-winded.
I know, that's why I said it. This is from Michael. Are you familiar with the writings of Dennis William Hawke? And if so, what is your opinion of the writings?
So I'm very familiar with Dennis William Hawke. In fact, I am doing an online class right now on his book called The Sorcerer's Stone. Dennis William Hawke is probably one of the best modern alchemists that exists in the world today. He has written more on transpersonal alchemy than anyone that I've encountered, except maybe Adam McLean. And I believe Hawke's work, especially his examination of transpersonal alchemy and using the alchemical process for deepening states of consciousness, is probably the best that there is. Yeah, and I'm currently doing an online class called Alchemy 101, where we're examining the Sorcerer's Stone. We're actually doing a full book study on Hawke's work.
This will have to be the last one.
No, more. Come on, what are they going to do? Close us down? Oh, you got to go to sleep? Oh, pay for the space. Okay, that makes sense.
So just super quick, maybe this is gauche or I don't know, but so
I'll
access,
be the judge of that. Yes.
Access, where, I mean, we know where we can get psilocybin.
Sure.
I guess I could get LSD, but I mean, what would be your recommendations for a safe experience?
So first, I tend to be somebody who really puts a lot of value in safety. So first off, 5-MeO-DMT, not easy to get. You either need to go to the dark web or you need to know somebody. And then any substances you get, you want to obviously test before you use it, because fentanyl is essentially in everything. So my recommendation is, if people want to have a 5-MeO-DMT experience, they should talk to people they know and love, to find a person that may have had a 5-MeO-DMT experience with somebody that they respect and honor, and then generally they would then refer somebody or even sponsor somebody into such an organization. See, I wasn't long-winded.
Yeah.
What's your name, brother?
My name's Tyler.
Hey, Tyler.
Yeah, it's very nice to meet you. It's
Pleasure to meet you too.
So I have a lot of questions, but this one is more of a kind of personally driven question. I've been a seeker my whole life. I'm 40 years old now, but this event took place probably 4 years ago. Nonetheless, you bring a lot to this question when he asked what the 5-MeO-DMT experience was like. So for me, what I had dealt with, and I'm really just maybe looking for anything really, sure. Is that coming from a place of being a seeker, what I found was literally the last thing that my ego ever wanted to find. Mm-hmm. And
usually is.
Totally. And so I was definitely having reactivations of the type 2. And it literally was kind of a very panic state because it felt like I was going to disappear.
Yeah.
And that has stuck with me. That's something that I've had to integrate in order to pick myself up and move forward. Do you find that problematic, or maybe just a part of the spiritual process that I've found myself on?
So thank you for asking that question, because it's probably the most important one, in my opinion. So in that work that I was describing, that final stuff where they were looking at it, you know, one of the things is that it was written by clinicians who are examining 5-MeO-DMT in a researched way. And the reactivation phenomena is the elephant in the room, the big elephant in the room. Sometimes it's the big elephant sitting on your chest in the room. And so not everyone is ready for the 5-MeO-DMT experience. You know, it's going to sound trite, but ready, willing, and able. There is nothing at all that can tell the person's readiness for this experience. There is no spiritual discipline that you can undertake. There is no individual who can go, oh yeah, you're ready for this experience. Willing is that the ego has to be utterly willing to give itself up completely and utterly. And that needs to be defined to the person who is stepping in, because it is not clearly defined. How do they know? And that's why appropriate orientation, meaning letting people know kind of what they might expect. And then the ability to allow for the complete ego dissolution, that then becomes the onus upon the individual. So the type 2 of the HPP effect is very, very real. What they've noted is that it happens in a small number of people, but it still happens. And so individuals undertaking the 5-MeO-DMT experience should never ever do it cavalierly or lightly, and they should have a good model or an integration model, or at least individuals that they can turn to within that experience. How long did your reactivations last? Still going? Yeah. Yeah. Good. And that's what's important. And I also believe that psychedelic integration and support is something that needs more development, especially around 5-MeO-DMT, because people need to be able to express what's going on for them and know that the dissolution process can continue after the original event. And it is, I believe, an organic part of it, but it can still disrupt your life quite a bit if you're not ready for it to do that. Even if, you know, and this is especially true for people who think they're, you know, heavy-duty psychonauts. Yeah, and the thing is that the ego, what I've learned in researching this particular molecule is our ego is a precious gift that we collectively as source consciousness have created in order that we can occupy these human physical vehicles for as temporary a life as they may do. Think about this for a second, you guys. We are the only physically embodied species that has cognition that we know about. I don't want to pay any disrespect to animal populations in any way, that we know about in the universe. Take that in for a second. Are there likely other life forms out there? There has to be. How could there not be? But we're the only ones that we know about. We are source consciousness, embodied in flesh, here to remember that. We've been telling ourselves cultural stories for a long, long time. We've been telling ourselves these cultural stories for so long that we actually believe them. And that's what's created our different religions and governments and isms of all kinds across broad scales. I believe 5-MeO-DMT is here as a wake-up call, because the fact is, it's always been here. It's always been in here. And what we are doing is remembering that and integrating that so that we can have lives more fully lived in the human condition. Thanks for that question. Really important.
I would argue that cats are also quite divine.
I agree. Cats are a higher level of being, and broader human intelligence is.
Only other creature besides the human that's aware of its divinity.
Probably even more so.
Another question from our online audience. How to locate a practitioner to know if 5 is a good option for PTSD work? That's kind of two questions, but.
So, how can could you say it again?
Well, you answered the, 2 questions ago, you answered the how to locate a practitioner. So we'll skip that part of the question and go to, is 5 a good option for PTSD work, like working through PTSD?
Well, I'll say this. Stanislav Grof certainly thinks it is. You know, he's written in various places that he believes is probably one of the best psychedelic or entheogenic medicines for alleviating PTSD. There are organizations right now in Mexico that are vets working with other vets with significant PTSD who are giving 5-MeO-DMT to other vets and alleviating PTSD. From my own knowledge, I have seen people with PTSD who have done 5-MeO-DMT experience, I can't call it full remission, but it removes the charge. It removes the charge of it so that they're not so obsessed with the post-traumatic stress. So how does one know? I have no idea. You know, the deal is, again, it is a gestalt that comes about from a participant meeting a practitioner and being honest about the PTSD that they're having, what it arises from. I think a good practitioner would become aware of the basics of the PTSD, where it's arising from, whether it's childhood abuse, whether it's from war, whether it's from other related violence, whatever the trauma is that caused it, it's good for the practitioner to at least have an idea about that so they can hold effective space for the individual when they're moving through that process. I also think that anyone who is working with this medicine and is looking for a psychotherapeutic result like that should also be working with a professional, psychiatrist, psychologist, depth psychologist, to provide the support necessary for ongoing integrative work and support after the 5-MeO-DMT experience. Again, I will say it's not a panacea, it's not a silver bullet, but the information that has been coming out, the anecdotal reporting has shown a lot of really promising results. The depression and anxiety reports alone at 81 to 79%. There is no antidepressive medication, no SSRI, NDRI, tricyclic that has shown that kind of success, including psilocybin and MDMA that we're aware of.
Any more questions? Yep, back here.
And again, I'm a scientific illuminist. I'm not a psychedelic researcher.
My question's actually along those lines. Excuse me. So, clinically speaking, with the effects after a session of 5-MeO-DMT, what is the reported time frame for a individual in terms of the alleviation of depression or anxiety, or is there a reported time frame
There isn't that I am aware of in terms of any kind of clinical research, because that clinical research has not been done yet.
Okay.
The anecdotal research the anecdotal research that's been done has shown that people can have alleviation of depression and anxiety for months afterwards, for literally months. And that's after one application. That's why people like Beckley Psytech and other organizations are raising so much money to research 5-MeO-DMT because of its long-term efficaciousness. It doesn't require daily dosing like an SSRI or an NDRI requires. I am personally aware of individuals who do 5-MeO-DMT on, let's call it a semi-annual or quarterly basis, because it relieves the symptomatic issues that they've been having for long periods of time. And then they'll come in and see a practitioner again, do the medicine. They call it an attunement, and it helps kind of attune them back and get them back into a regulated state. Yeah, that's the best I got on that one, but good question.
Question from our online audience. What are your thoughts on why 5-MeO-DMT models the near-death experience? Or what role might 5 play in the death experience?
Great question. So, Rick Strassman in his book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, put forward the idea that somehow, and this was all completely speculative, that somehow at the moment of birth, DMT is released from the pineal gland, and that allows for the spirit to imbue itself into the human being coming into the world. And subsequently, the thought was that upon death, it is another flush of DMT that allows the spirit to release. I don't know if I buy any of that. What I would say is that there is a phenomenon that 5-MeO-DMT specifically induces that is effectively ego dissolution, for lack of any other word. Is that whatever we've thought ourselves to be dissolves completely away, and we move into this space that is not a space, into this experience that is the totality of existence, that is where all existence comes from. And so it's a remembrance of that. It's a touching of that. And these human bodies and this consciousness that seems to be indwelling in them, I believe that the physical body and our individual egoic consciousness is a temporary phenomenon, whereas the experience of 5-MeO-DMT engenders is whatever we want to call it, samadhi, satori, nirvana. It's the ultimate reality. Now, most of the religious traditions would like to postulate the idea that somehow this physical reality is an illusion. It's Maya. It's not real. I will hold this is real. This is real physical reality, and that is the ultimate reality. Both of them as real as they can be. 5-MeO-DMT induces a state of consciousness that allows us full remembrance of that reality. And so one could say that was mirroring the death experience, because that's likely where you're gonna go. The place that is not a place, the infinite and eternal, everything all at once, forever, right now.
Can confirm. Do we have any more in-house? Yes.
Would you mind standing up?
Oh, yeah, sure. Hey.
Tell me your name.
Winnie.
Yeah. How you doing, Winnie?
Doing well.
Good. What's your question?
At the psilocybin conference this last year, hearing about psilocybin held in community in Mexico to make community guidance.
Yes.
Families being brought in through sitting in a circle and holding. In your 30 years of experience and the witnessing of the evolution of psychedelia that you've seen, do you have projections, or is there plans or ideas of 5-MeO-DMT having community integration to guide society or societies?
So I don't know about 5-MeO-DMT specifically, but within the context of plant medicines, psychedelics, and entheogens, I think that ultimately that's what they're showing us, is that true community is absolutely necessary for the survival of our species and for the survival of our planet. And so it's very, very likely, not to be dark or depressive about it, that we're rapidly heading towards a sixth extinction event. And that if we don't figure that out as a species, it's going to be unavoidable. And so it's either figure it out, and really what this is about is connection. Connection with self, connection with source, and connection with others in community. Or going back, in which case it was a nice experiment. And so I am one who is an optimist and believes that we still have a chance to awaken, to wake up before we burn it all down. And I'm praying that that's happening. There is a rapid expansion within the psychedelic and growing entheogenic communities across our planet. Ayahuasca is the fastest growing religion on our planet right now. You know that? Are people aware of that? Yeah. Ayahuasca spirituality is the fastest growing religious organization on our planet right now. And so I believe that all of the earth medicines, the plant medicines, and including synthetically derived medicines that can awaken us to who we are, why we're here at this particular time in human history, has a likelihood that it might just save us from that sixth extinction event. I would like to see more organization in that way, but I believe this is a one individual at a time phenomena. And that when one individual can touch another individual appropriately and with consent, in this way, to assist them in awakening, and then can potentially show them how to assist others in that awakening, that can create a wave effect, a 100th monkey effect that will then roll out and exponentially allow for the awakening of human consciousness and awareness to move us into this next level of our consciousness, which I believe, you can call it by many things. It's just us awakening to our higher intuitive consciousness that will allow us to bring the genius through that will allow us to survive as a species and to hopefully thrive for the next few million years. Or we can get on a rocket. We can get on one of Jeff Bezos' rockets or Elon Musk's rockets and go to Mars. Or not.
Due to time, that had to be our last question for the evening. I wanted to thank everybody so much for coming out to the Sanctum Speaker Series featuring Merrill Ward.
Thank you, Tom.
It's my absolute pleasure. Just a quick reminder, tomorrow we have the Sanctum Open Mic right here in this room. Doors are at 7. We start the party at 8. On Tuesday is the Sanctum Integration Circle. That's at 4403 Southeast Milwaukee Avenue. 4033, excuse me. If you need any clarification, talk to Eden. She's obviously way more organized than I am.
Can I ask a question? Are you accepting donations or further contributions for your nonprofit organization?
Yes.
How wonderful.
Yeah.
What a unique and thoughtful idea.
So, for those not totally familiar, what Sanctum is doing is, we all know that psilocybin therapy is coming to Oregon and they're just working on the infrastructure. But the price is going to be about $2,000 to $3,000
Ouch.
a visit. Well, Eden and I, we didn't want to despair about it. We just wanted to solve the problem. So what we did is, this was Eden's idea. We were opening up a thrift store and putting aside a bank scholarship for people who need psilocybin therapy but cannot afford it. We will be stepping in to pay so that they can do it. We'll be beginning with ketamine because that's already federally legal, and then we're going to grow the psilocybin movement within the confines of the law as it expands. So if you do have any clothing donations, we take tchotchkes, vintage wear, anything like that. It can be dropped off here on Monday nights or at our shop, which the Integration Circle will be at on Tuesday, and that's 4033, thank you, Southeast Milwaukee Avenue. And on the back of your programs are upcoming events. The dates are all there. March 12th, we have Jonathan Fredette doing a mushroom grow demonstration. April 16th, Ayana and myself will be tarot and psychedelic magic, so mushrooms and
That's
occult
gonna be
secrets.
fun.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. Ayana knows. Very good. Very good. And just a reminder, this July 22nd, 23rd, our Sanctum Psychedelic Conference is going to be right here in the theater area.
I'm
Dennis
hoping to be
McKenna
there.
is coming to be our keynote speaker. And whether or not Merrill is moving at that time, we'll also be speaking again for Sanctum. Thank you all so much for coming out. Have a great night. Get home safe.
If anybody has any questions afterwards, I'm happy to talk to people until Tom kicks us out. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Eden. You guys are awesome.
And thank you, Merrill. You're pretty awesome too, brother.
Really good question.